What teacher made you realize that some people should never have power over children? I was in English class when my phone buzzed. It was my little sister, Layla. Alex, the doctors say it's happening. I don't want to die alone. My blood went cold. Layla was 11, and she was at the hospital by herself. The student teacher, Mrs. Garrett, saw my phone. Phone's away during state testing. My sister's dying. She has cancer, and the doctors just called her. I know all about your family situation. Mrs. Garrett cut me off coldly. The whole school knows. That doesn't mean you get special treatment. My classmates shifted uncomfortably. They'd all been at Mom's funeral 3 weeks ago. They'd seen Layla in her wheelchair, still clutching the birthday card Mom never got to open. Another text. The nurse says maybe an hour. Please come. I need you. Please! I shot up. She's alone! The doctor said she's dying. Mrs. Garrett's face hardened. She's been dying for months. Convenient timing for test day. Check her Instagram! Jasmine called out. Everyone knew Layla. She was the kid who still wore light-up sneakers to chemo and brought her stuffed elephant everywhere. I refreshed Instagram with shaking hands. Layla posted a video from her hospital bed. Oxygen tubes in her nose. Her tiny face so pale. If anyone sees my brother Alex, tell him I love him. The doctors say it's time. I'm scared to go alone. Mrs. Garrett walked to her desk and pulled out a metal lockbox. Phones in the box. State testing protocol. But my sister. Phones. Now. Or automatic failure and academic probation. She went row by row. Kids were trying to dial the hospital before dropping their phones in, but nothing would connect. The old building's concrete walls made half the school a dead zone. The landline! Ryan pointed to the classroom phone. Mrs. Garrett yanked the cord from the wall. No disruptions during state testing. My phone buzzed one last time before she snatched it. They're calling Dad, but he's in surgery. You're the only one who can come. Please. I don't want to die like Mommy did. Alone. She's dying alone! I screamed. Mrs. Garrett locked the phone box in her filing cabinet. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She pulled out her keys and locked the classroom door from the inside. There. Now we can focus without disruptions. What are you doing? Bobby stood up. Following lockdown protocol. We practiced this last month. She smiled coldly. No one in or out until testing ends. Through the door's narrow window, I could see kids in the hallway heading to lunch. They couldn't hear us through the reinforced glass. Mrs. Garrett. Zoe's voice was shaking. His sister is 11. She's dying. Alone. She returned to her desk. Hospitals have nurses. She's not alone. My chest felt like it was caving in. Katie was at the window trying to force it open. These old windows only opened 6 inches. Safety protocol. Maybe someone will notice. David started. It's C Hall during lunch. Ryan said flatly. No one comes here for an hour. Mrs. Garrett pulled out her own phone, made sure we could all see her putting it in her drawer and locking it. See? I follow the same rules. That's called fairness. That's when something inside me snapped. Just like Mom always said, sometimes you have to choose between rules and what's right. I looked Mrs. Garrett dead in the eyes. You want to stop me? You'll have to physically stop me. Sit down right now or I picked up my chair. What are you? No! Crash. The window exploded. Glass everywhere. Alarms started shrieking. You're expelled! I was already climbing through. That's when I heard it behind me. Chairs scraping. Feet running. If he's expelled, I'm expelled. Ben's voice. Me too. Zoe. Move, Mrs. Garrett. I glanced back to see the entire class pushing past her, flooding through the broken window after me. Even quiet Elena. Even perfect grades David. Mrs. Garrett was screaming about police, about criminal charges, about ruined futures. I don't remember getting to the hospital. I just remember flying through the pediatric ward doors, racing to room 417. Layla was so small in that bed. Her breathing was so shallow. When I burst through the door, her eyes fluttered open. Alex, you came? I'm here, Lils. I'm right here. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. I was so scared to go alone, like Mommy. The entire class burst through the door minutes later. They'd all followed me. Layla smiled weakly at them, then looked back at me. Now I'm not alone. She passed peacefully 20 minutes later, holding my hand, surrounded by love. Mrs. Garrett's teaching license was revoked in every state. Criminal charges are still pending. Good riddance. Or so I thought, because when we were cleaning out Layla's hospital room, I found something in her diary that made my blood run cold. Alex, I need to tell you something about Mrs. Garrett she'd written the day before. The entry continued. She came to see Mom in the hospital. They were arguing. Mom kept saying, you'll never get them. Never. Mrs. Garrett said something about when you're gone. That's when I found it. Hidden in Layla's stuffed elephant, a letter in Mom's handwriting, dated the week before she died. And when I read the first line, I understood why she was willing to let an 11-year-old die alone. My hands shook as I smoothed out the crumpled paper on the waiting room table. Mom's handwriting filled 3 pages, and right there at the top she'd written that Mrs. Garrett had been trying to get custody of us for months. The letter explained everything. Mrs. Garrett was Dad's cousin's daughter, who'd lost her teaching job in Ohio for something called boundary issues with students. She'd shown up here 6 months ago, claiming she wanted to help our family. Mom wrote that Mrs. Garrett had been watching me at the school and writing down every single thing I did wrong. She'd been building a file to prove I was too angry and violent to take care of Layla after Mom died. Every time I raised my voice in class or got frustrated with homework, Mrs. Garrett wrote it down and twisted it into evidence. Mom's letter said Mrs. Garrett planned to go to court the week after the funeral to get emergency custody. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every page. I texted them to myself, then made a new email account just for this and sent them there too. The waiting room door opened and my whole class walked in. Ben asked if I was okay while Zoe handed me a pack of tissues from her backpack. I held up the first page of the letter and watched their faces change as they read it. Jasmine grabbed her phone and started taking her own pictures, while Bobby kept saying we needed to call the police right away. David mentioned his mom was a lawyer and pulled out his phone to call her. That's when I remembered what Layla had written about Mrs. Garrett visiting Mom. I dug through Layla's backpack until I found her diary with the sparkly unicorn cover. There were more entries I hadn't seen before. 2 weeks ago, she'd written that Mrs. Garrett brought papers to Mom's hospital room and Mom wouldn't sign them. Another entry from last month said Mrs. Garrett kept asking Layla weird questions about me. Did I ever yell at her? Did I get mad? Did I scare her? Layla had written in purple gel pen that she told Mrs. Garrett I was the best big brother in the whole world. Reading those words made me lose it completely. Ryan pulled out his phone and started a group chat with everyone from our English class. Within 10 minutes, we had statements from all 13 kids who were locked in that room. Katie typed out exactly what she saw, describing how Mrs. Garrett locked the door and pulled the phone cord from the wall. Ben wrote about hearing my sister's video and watching Mrs. Garrett smile while refusing to let me leave. Elena, who never talked in class, wrote 3 paragraphs about how scared she was watching an adult trap us during an emergency. Bobby documented the timeline minute by minute. Zoe described Mrs. Garrett putting her own phone in the drawer to prove she was being fair. Even David, who never got in trouble for anything, wrote about how wrong it felt to be locked in while someone's sister was dying. That evening, Dad finally got home from the hospital, and I showed him everything. His face went white as he read Mom's letter, and he had to sit down at the kitchen table. He kept shaking his head and saying he had no idea about any of this. He knew Mrs. Garrett was some kind of distant relative through his cousin, but didn't didn't know about her past or why she really came here. He thought she was just trying to help our family during a hard time. He rubbed his face with both hands and started telling me how Mrs. Garrett first showed up at the hospital 6 months ago while he was between surgeries. She said she was family through his cousin Margaret and wanted to help with us kids while Mom was sick. Dad pulled out his phone and showed me the texts she'd sent him. All these messages about wanting to support the family and how kids need stability during hard times. He thought having another adult around would be good for us, especially someone who worked at my school and could keep an eye on me. I asked him straight out if he knew she'd been visiting Mom in the hospital. His shoulders slumped and he admitted Mrs. Garrett had asked for Mom's room number a bunch of times. He gave it to her thinking she wanted to pray with Mom or bring her flowers or something normal relatives do. He never thought she was going there to pressure Mom about custody papers. We sat there for a minute just staring at all the evidence spread across the kitchen table. Dad picked up the phone and dialed 911, telling them we needed to report something about Mrs. Garrett. 20 minutes later, a cop showed up at our door, this older guy with a notepad who listened to everything and looked through Mom's letter. I wonder why Mrs. Garrett picked today of all days to show this side of herself so openly. The way she locked that door and pulled out the phone cord, that's not just following rules, that's something else entirely, isn't it? He took pictures of every page and wrote down what we told him, but then he said custody disputes were civil matters unless there was proof of an actual crime. He took a report and gave us a case number, but warned us not to expect much from the criminal side. The next morning, my phone rang while I was eating cereal, and it was the school secretary saying I needed to come in about the broken window. Dad grabbed his keys and said he was coming with me, and we made copies of Mom's letter at the library on the way there. Principal Weaver's office smelled like coffee, and those vanilla candles she always had burning. I sat in the leather chair across from her desk, while Dad stood behind me, and I started explaining everything from the beginning. She read Mom's letter, and her face went from confused to worried to completely shocked. She picked up her desk phone and called the district office, telling whoever answered that they needed Alden Proctor to come to the school immediately for an emergency investigation. While we waited for him to arrive, she pulled up Mrs. Garrett's personnel file on her computer and started scrolling through it. Her eyes got wider as she read something on the screen. She turned the monitor so we could see it and pointed to the part about why Mrs. Garrett left her last job. The application said personal reasons, but there was an attachment from her previous district that mentioned forced resignation due to boundary violations with students. Alden Proctor showed up an hour later with a briefcase and a digital recorder. He was this tall guy in a gray suit who shook our hands and said he took these matters very seriously. For the next 2 hours, he interviewed me about everything, recording every word and making copies of all our evidence. He kept asking about specific dates and times when Mrs. Garrett interacted with our family, writing notes in this leather notebook. He wanted to know exactly when she started visiting Mom, when she asked about custody, when she locked us in the classroom. Then he dropped something that made my stomach turn. 2 other families had already filed complaints about Mrs. Garrett trying to get too involved in their personal lives. One was a single dad whose wife died of cancer last year, and Mrs. Garrett kept showing up at his house offering to help with his kids. The other family had a mom with MS, and Mrs. Garrett had been asking their kids weird questions about their home life. That afternoon, I was sitting in my room when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Rosa Arias, one of the nurses from the pediatric ward who'd taken care of Layla. She'd heard about the investigation from someone at the hospital and wanted to tell me what she saw. She confirmed that Mrs. Garrett had been arguing with Mom in her room about 2 weeks before Mom died. Rosa heard Mrs. Garrett say those kids need proper guidance in this really aggressive tone, while Mom kept saying no over and over. Rosa had been about to go in and check on them when Mrs. Garrett stormed out looking mad, but that wasn't even the worst part. Rosa also remembered Mrs. Garrett trying to get into Layla's medical records by claiming she was family. She'd gone to the nurses' station and asked to see Layla's charts, saying she was our aunt and needed to know about treatment options. When the nurses asked for ID proving she was family, Mrs. Garrett got upset and started making a scene about how the hospital was keeping family members in the dark. Security had to come up and escort her out of the building when she wouldn't leave on her own. Rosa said she'd filed an incident report about it, but didn't know if anyone had followed up. She gave me the date and time it happened and said she'd testify if we needed her to. The next morning at the school, I walked into total chaos with kids everywhere holding signs that said things like, "Fire Garrett now," and "Justice for Alex and Layla." Ben and Zoe had organized the whole thing overnight, texting everyone about what happened. Bobby was handing out flyers with a timeline of everything Mrs. Garrett did, from locking us in to letting my sister die alone. Even kids from other grades who didn't know me personally were joining in after hearing the story. Principal Weaver came out trying to get everyone to go to class, but nobody was moving. Katie's mom showed up with a megaphone and started leading chants about child safety. More parents kept arriving, pulling their cars right up to the front entrance and demanding answers. The local news van pulled up just as the district superintendent arrived, looking panicked. That's when Jasmine's dad, who was on the school board, announced they were calling an emergency meeting for that evening. By lunch, the protest had grown, so big that classes were basically canceled. Teachers were coming out to support us too, sharing their own concerns about Mrs. Garrett's behavior. Ryan's older brother, who graduated last year, posted about it on social media, and it went viral within hours. The school board meeting that evening was absolute madness, with every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Parents were taking turns at the microphone, sharing disturbing stories about Mrs. Garrett. One mom said Mrs. Garrett had asked really personal questions about their family finances during a parent conference. Another dad said she'd shown up at his workplace asking about his wife's medical condition. A single mom broke down crying, saying Mrs. Garrett kept offering to babysit her kids for free, which seemed nice at first, but got creepy. Then, the doors opened and Mrs. Garrett walked in, wearing this professional suit like nothing had happened. She went straight to the microphone and started talking about how this was all a big misunderstanding. She claimed I was an unstable student who had violent tendencies, and she was just following protocol. When someone shouted about Mom's letter, she actually smiled and said Mom was confused from the pain medication. That's when Dad stood up from where he'd been sitting quietly in the back. He walked to the front and told everyone that Mrs. Garrett was lying about everything. She suddenly blurted out that Dad had promised her she could help raise us after Mom died. Dad's face went completely red, and he called her a liar in front of everyone. The board members were looking at each other in shock as Mrs. Garrett kept insisting Dad had agreed to this. She said they discussed it at the hospital, and he'd been grateful for her offer to help. Dad pulled out his phone and showed texts where he'd specifically told her to stay away from us. The board voted right there to suspend her immediately while they investigated everything. 3 days later, Alden Proctor called to tell us what he'd found during his investigation. Mrs. Garrett had been researching guardianship laws for months before Mom even died. She'd bookmarked dozens of websites about custody proceedings and requirements for getting guardianship. She'd even consulted with a family lawyer named Roger Paulson about the process. The lawyer had kept all their emails because something felt wrong about the whole situation. He contacted the district himself, saying he was disturbed by what he'd learned after seeing the news. In the emails, Mrs. Garrett described our family as neglectful and claimed we were in danger. She wrote that Dad was never home because of work, and I couldn't properly care for Layla. She called us a broken family that needed someone stable to step in and save us. The lawyer had told her she didn't have grounds for custody, which apparently made her angry. She'd responded saying she would find a way to prove we needed her intervention. That same afternoon, a reporter from Channel 7 showed up at our house after parents had contacted them. Dad didn't want to talk at first, but I convinced him people needed to know the truth. The story aired that night, and within hours, people from Mrs. Garrett's past started coming forward. A principal from Idaho called the news station, saying she'd resigned from his school after similar problems. A family in Oregon posted on Facebook about how she'd tried to get custody of their kids. 3 different schools confirmed she'd been forced out for crossing boundaries with students and families. The next morning, a detective named Marta Baez from the Child Crimes Unit came to our house. She said this had gone way beyond a school matter and was now a criminal investigation. She interviewed me for 3 hours, recording everything and taking notes about every interaction with Mrs. Garrett. She interviewed all my classmates too, building a case for attempted fraud and conspiracy. During the investigation, Detective Baez found something that made everyone sick. Mrs. Garrett had been taking photos of me at the school without my permission for months. She had a whole file on her computer labeled Evidence of Instability with hundreds of pictures. The photos were just normal stuff like me laughing with friends or looking tired in class. She'd added captions to each one trying to make normal teenage behavior look concerning. One photo made Detective Baez actually gasp when she showed it to us. It was a picture of me crying at Mom's funeral, my face twisted in grief. Mrs. Garrett had written underneath it, emotional instability and inability to cope with loss. Even the detective, who'd seen terrible things in her job, looked shaken by how cruel that was. The hospital called Dad the next morning while we were eating breakfast. They wanted to meet with us about their own investigation into Mom's care records. We drove there in silence and met with the administrator in a small conference room. She pulled out a thick folder and showed us visitor logs from Mom's final weeks. Mrs. Garrett's name appeared 7 times, not the 2 visits she'd told everyone about. The administrator pointed to the dates, and I noticed something that made me sick. Something doesn't add up about Mrs. Garrett visiting Mom 7 times when she claimed only 2 visits. The hospital logs don't lie. So what was she really doing during those other 5 visits that she wanted to keep hidden? Each visit happened right before Mom got worse. After the first visit, Mom's blood pressure spiked. After the 3rd, she had breathing problems. After the 5th, her kidneys started failing. The administrator said they couldn't prove Mrs. Garrett did anything, but the pattern was disturbing. Then the head nurse from Layla's ward knocked on the door and came in with her own folder. She showed us phone records where Mrs. Garrett had called the pediatric ward 23 times asking about Layla. The calls always asked the same questions about life expectancy and how much time was left. The nurses thought it was weird, but didn't know who to tell since Mrs. Garrett claimed to be helping our family. One nurse had written notes about Mrs. Garrett trying to get medical details that weren't her business. Back at the school, my classmates were amazing through everything. Ben started bringing me lunch every day so I wouldn't have to go to the cafeteria alone. Bobby organized rides to and from the school when Dad couldn't drive me. Zoe made copies of all her notes and homework without me asking. Even Elena, who barely talked to anyone before, started sitting with me during free periods. She'd just sit there quietly, but her presence helped more than words could. She organized study groups at her house and made sure I didn't fall behind in any classes. 2 weeks after Layla died, the school held a memorial service in the auditorium. Every single person from our English class showed up wearing light-up sneakers like Layla used to wear. Teachers who'd had Mrs. Garrett as a student teacher came forward with their own stories. One said Mrs. Garrett had asked too many personal questions about students' home lives. Another mentioned she'd tried to get access to confidential student files. The math teacher said Mrs. Garrett had volunteered to do home visits, which wasn't normal for student teachers. During the service, Jasmine stood up and read a poem she'd written about Layla's bravery. She talked about the light-up sneakers and the stuffed elephant, and how Layla smiled even during chemo. People were crying everywhere, even the tough kids who never showed emotion. After the service, we all went outside to the courtyard, where maintenance had dug a hole for a tree. We planted it together, everyone taking turns with the shovel. The principal revealed a plaque that said, "In memory of Layla, who taught us that love is stronger than rules." 3 days later, the district investigator finished his report, and Dad got a copy. It was 47 pages long and listed 17 different policy violations Mrs. Garrett had committed. She'd lied on her application about previous employment. She'd accessed student records without permission. She'd violated boundaries with multiple families. The report recommended criminal prosecution and said she should never be allowed near children again. The investigator found evidence she'd been planning something with her family for months. That same afternoon, the police got a tip that Mrs. Garrett was at the bus station. Officers found her trying to buy a ticket to Florida with cash. She had 2 suitcases and had dyed her hair black to change her appearance. They arrested her right there at the ticket counter, while other passengers watched. She screamed that this was all a misunderstanding and she was just taking a vacation. The officers charged her with attempted custodial interference, fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. At her bail hearing 2 days later, the courtroom was packed with parents from the school. The prosecutor stood up and dropped a bomb that shocked everyone. Mrs. Garrett had done this before in 2 other states. In Montana, she tried to get custody of 3 kids whose mom had cancer. In Nevada, she targeted a family where the dad was dying. Both times, she'd positioned herself as the stable adult who could save the children. The families from those states sent statements describing her manipulation. The judge listened to everything with a grim expression on his face. When it was time to decide on bail, he called Mrs. Garrett a clear danger to children and a flight risk. He denied bail completely, which meant she'd stay in jail until trial. As the bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, she started screaming that she was only trying to help us. She yelled that we needed her and Dad couldn't take care of us alone. She kept playing the victim even as they dragged her out of the courtroom. That night, Dad broke down completely for the first time since Mom died. He blamed himself for letting Mrs. Garrett into our lives and couldn't stop apologizing to me. I showed him Mom's letter again where she specifically wrote not to blame him. Mom knew Mrs. Garrett was a master manipulator who fooled everyone. Dad started seeing a therapist the next week to deal with his guilt. The therapist helped him understand that predators like Mrs. Garrett are experts at finding vulnerable families. Dad went twice a week and slowly started to forgive himself for not seeing through her lies. 2 weeks later, I was going through Mom's jewelry box looking for her necklace to wear to court when my fingers found a folded paper stuck under the velvet lining. My hands shook as I opened another letter from Mom, this one addressed to both me and Dad, dated just 3 days before she died. She wrote that Mrs. Garrett was the best liar she'd ever met, someone who could convince anyone of anything, and we shouldn't blame ourselves for not seeing through her act when even trained professionals at her old